Hello, all. I wanted to talk to you today about the case of Dylan Rounds. You may have heard of this case, and there are a few people who have covered it, but I wanted to cover it because it's a really sad story, and it really just goes to show that jealousy is one of the number one killers in this world. It also teaches you a lesson that, sometimes the police just don't frankly give a damn. And sometimes you have to be your own private investigator. This case is still ongoing, so information will be changed as time goes on. But for now, let's first talk about the background of Mr. Dylan. At 19 years old, Mr. Dylan Rounds already knew what he wanted to do in life. He wanted to be a farmer, and he had already had his own farm in a little small area in Utah. Isn't that inspirational? How many people knew what they wanted to do at 19 and already had the money to purchase their own acres for farming? But shortly before his first harvest, and shortly after he called his grandmother, he would never call anyone again. And of course, that would spark worry in his family. Now, the sad part is that when his family did report him missing, the police didn't seem to give a damn. As a matter of fact, the police basically said that Dylan probably just gave up farming because it was too hard and he took off. But obviously his mother knew that Dylan would never give up, especially since farming was his dream. It was very frustrating, and even though Dylan's own family set the reward to over $100,000, there were still no clues for quite a while. After receiving Dylan's cell phone, as well as some of the DNA that were on certain items in certain locations, they finally had a suspect named James Brenner. Now, James here, as you see in the photo, already had a very violent past. Before he was even a suspect in the Dylan Rounds case, he was already being held in jail for unrelated firearms charges.
Brenner was an acquaintance of her son. Actually, he was his neighbor. Really, he was a trespasser, if we want to be honest. Brenner was squatting in a trailer that was a few miles away from Dylan's property. And Mr. Brenner has quite the history, or maybe I should say criminal history. You see, according to various reporting, Brenner shot a man in the 1980s over a work dispute. And back in 2012, Brenner was sentenced to over 2.5 years in prison for illegal possession of a firearm because he was a convicted felon. And then in June and July of 2022, he was hit with federal firearms charges. Now, what's interesting is that Dylan's parents apparently had a weird feeling about James Brenner, especially because of alleged comments that Brenner made about Dylan in the past.
Jim was talking to a kid that works for me. I was watching him on the cameras. He was telling the kid what a spoiled kid Dylan was. I doesn't treat anything very good. You could just see a lot of jealousy in him. And I called Dylan and I said, Jim Brenner isn't your friend. He's sitting there talking about you. And he said, Jim's just kind of an ass.
So then when we got up there, Brenner was telling myself and my husband about how, Dylan couldn't fight his way out of anything. He shouldn't have even had a gun. He didn't know how to use it. All he could do was throw it at somebody. Like just all this really weird, like it's just not stuff you say when, and then I said, because we originally thought, hey, maybe Dylan left the shed and he's walking back to his farm because Brenner didn't give him a ride. He's out there bit by a snake, fell and broke an ankle, whatever.
A couple of years ago, I introduced myself to Brenner. He was at my grandpa's house. My son had bought a bunch of pigs, and across the road from my grandpa's house was a vet clinic, and Jim Brenner was there. I was pretty upset that they bought the pigs and brought them to that property, and I was pretty upset when I left. And Dylan texted me and says, Jim Brenner's going to shoot you, and he's going to do, he doesn't like to be talked to like that. I said, well, then I'll have to come talk to him. And I came back to talk to him at the farm, and he was with my dad. My dad was calming me down, and it kind of just blew over.
As you can see, Brenner was a huge hothead. And it seemed like Dylan knew exactly this. That's why the most important piece of evidence right now is a video of him on Dylan's cell phone cleaning his gun while also wearing blood-stained clothes, with his DNA found to be on the clothes. Like I said earlier, jealousy is a huge motivation and why some people want to commit murder against others. It doesn't quite make sense, but then again, let's be honest. Evil doesn't have to make sense. The way I see it, Brenner was a squatter. And I've realized that squatters, they believe that the land that they are squatting on is theirs and theirs alone. Even though they don't pay any property taxes, any rent. Hell, I mean, most of them don't even mow the lawn or upkeep the property. Squatters are extremely dangerous since they believe that the land is theirs and theirs alone. If anyone tries to come near their turf or on their turf, they will view that as a threat and try to eliminate them. I've seen it time and time again. I know some people would think that it would just be easy to just grab a squatter and throw them out of the property, but in a lot of places in the US, that is just simply impossible. There are things called squatters' laws and squatters' rights, which means you have to actually go to court and get an eviction in order to get them off the property. But even then, some squatters will refuse to give up and will often try and, murder you if they even think you're trying to get them off their property. Dealing with squatters is very dangerous. To be honest, I don't know if Dylan could have done anything to prevent this. It seems like this guy was just unhinged and he was going to kill someone for, being on his turf or whatever. And unfortunately, that someone had to be Dylan. I've heard this saying more and more come up, especially with the pandemic making people lose a lot of money and even their jobs, that a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing on earth. And I have to say that's probably true. While Brenner was squatting, he had no job, possibly no money, and he probably stole that gun because technically he couldn't even own a firearm. That's why he was in jail in the first place.
And what do they find? You remember the boots that his parents mentioned? Well, deputies discovered those boots, Dylan Round's boots, where Brenner was squatting. And one boot had a blood stain that DNA analysis confirmed belonged to Dylan Rounds, in addition to DNA belonging to Brenner. They also found Dylan's farm truck. But that's not all. Cell phone records show that Dylan's phone moved near where Brenner was squatting on the day that Dylan vanished. And they also find Dylan's actual phone at Lucin Pond. And when investigators do a digital forensic download of the phone, they find a video, time-stamped at the time of Dylan's disappearance. And in this video, you see Brenner with, quote, blood stains on his arms and shirt as he is cleaning a gun. And guess what? Investigators find and test that shirt, and Dylan's DNA is on it. And according to Fox News, after Dylan went missing, a neighbor claims that Brenner asked him to hide several guns for him, saying it was for his own safety, and that, quote, the last time he had trouble with the law, they took everything from him, and he didn't want the things that he had left to be taken away. According to authorities, quote, Brenner was interviewed and made several claims that corroborated forensic evidence, in addition to making numerous demonstrably false statements. Well, it may have taken almost a year from when they said Brenner was a suspect, but this month, the sheriff's office announced that James Brenner had been officially charged with aggravated murder and abuse or desecration of a human body in connection with the disappearance of Dylan Rounds. And by the way, he was actually charged while still behind bars on those gun charges I mentioned as well.
Unfortunately, the police have not been able to find his body at the time of me making this video. I haven't seen any more updates, but like I said earlier, this is still an ongoing case, so information could change in a matter of upcoming weeks. I am very glad that Dylan's parents, especially his mom, are able to get some type of closure from all this. I feel very sad for his family and friends, as this was really the definition of senseless violence.
People don't realize how big of a fight when I say how much of a win these charges are, because this has been such an extreme fight to get to this point.
What an absolute sad story. A young man who had everything he dreamed of versus a man with nothing to lose that had anger issues for land that he didn't even own. Squatters are really dangerous. And all I can say is just check up on your friends, family, and other loved ones, especially if they are residing in a typically rural area where police don't really give a damn until it's way too late.